You think healing means feeling better, but Jung discovered something that flips everything upside down. The people who've healed the most don't feel perfect. They feel different. And these 7 signs prove you've transformed more than you realize. Today I'm showing you the psychological shifts that happen when you've actually integrated your shadow, not just buried it deeper. Most people think healing looks like constant happiness, perfect boundaries, and never getting triggered again. That's not healing. That's fantasy. Jung spent decades observing patients who genuinely healed from psychological trauma, and what he discovered was disturbing. Real healing doesn't make you softer. It makes you selectively harder. It doesn't eliminate your darkness. It teaches you to wield it consciously. The difference between someone who's healed and someone who's just suppressing. The healed person has integrated their shadow. They've stopped projecting their darkness onto others and started owning every part of themselves. This process creates 7 unmistakable psychological shifts that most people never recognize in themselves, but once you see them, you'll realize how far you've actually come. The most dangerous psychological state Jung identified was shadow projection, with absolute conviction. When someone sees their own denied qualities in everyone around them and believes with complete certainty that these qualities exist only in others, they become psychologically toxic. They destroy relationships while maintaining total innocence because their brain has literally rewritten reality to support their distorted perceptions. But here's what happens when you've healed. You stop seeing enemies everywhere. You stop being absolutely certain about other people's hidden motivations. When someone triggers you, your first thought isn't about what's wrong with them. It's about what unintegrated part of yourself they're reflecting back. This doesn't mean you become naive or stop recognizing genuine manipulation. It means you've developed the psychological maturity to distinguish between actual external threats and projected internal content. You can observe someone's behavior without needing to make them the villain in your personal mythology. Jung called this conscious discrimination, the ability to see clearly what belongs to you and what belongs to others. When you've achieved this, you've passed the first and most important test of genuine healing. You're no longer unconsciously dangerous to the people around you. The unhealed empath operates as an emotional shock absorber for everyone in their environment. They feel everything from everyone and believe this constant absorption is their gift. But Jung identified this pattern as psychological vampirism in reverse. The empath doesn't drain others. They allow others to drain them until there's nothing left. When you've healed, something radical happens. You become what Jung called selectively empathetic. You still possess the ability to feel deeply and perceive others' emotional states with startling accuracy. But now you choose where that empathy flows. You've learned that your sensitivity isn't a curse requiring you to sacrifice yourself. It's a gift requiring protection and strategic deployment. This shift terrifies people who were used to unlimited access to your emotional energy. Suddenly, you're unavailable for their drama. You're not absorbing their anxiety. You're not fixing their problems while ignoring your own. And they can't understand what changed. What changed is that you integrated the shadow aspect of empathy, the part that knows how to say no, the part that recognizes emotional manipulation before it takes root, the part that understands your well-being matters as much as anyone else's. You didn't lose your empathy, you gained boundaries around it. Jung documented a devastating pattern in highly perceptive individuals. They possessed what he called differentiated intuition, the ability to see psychological patterns and unconscious contents that others completely missed. But this gift created a problem. It separated them from normal human connection because they saw too much, felt too much, perceived too much. When you're unhealed and highly perceptive, your greatest strength becomes your greatest burden. You can read people with surgical precision, But this ability makes you feel like an alien among humans. You can't engage in small talk because you see through every social facade. You can't maintain friendships because people feel exposed around you. Your superior function isolates you completely. But when you've healed, you've learned to integrate this ability without letting it dominate your entire personality. You can still perceive deeply, but you've developed other psychological functions that balance your perception. You can engage with people at the level they're comfortable with instead of forcing depth on every interaction. This doesn't mean you've dulled your awareness. It means you've learned to hold your perceptions lightly. You see what you see, but you're no longer compelled to speak every truth or analyze every interaction. You've become comfortable existing in multiple registers, shifting between deep perception and simple presence depending on what the moment requires. The unhealed person falls prey to what Jung identified as reality distortion fields. Someone projects their shadow onto you with absolute conviction, and despite your internal experience contradicting their perception, you start questioning your own reality. They tell you you're angry when you're calm. They insist you're manipulative when you're being direct. And their certainty makes you doubt what you know to be true. This vulnerability to gaslighting reveals an unintegrated psyche. You haven't fully claimed your right to trust your own perceptions. You're still looking for external validation of your internal experience. You need others to confirm your reality because you haven't yet developed unshakable trust in your own consciousness. When you've healed, this dynamic becomes impossible. Someone can project their distorted perceptions onto you all day, and it slides off like water off stone. You know what you felt. You know what you intended. You know your own internal landscape with such clarity that no amount of external insistence can make you doubt it. Jung observed that people who reached this stage of integration became psychologically untouchable, not because they were arrogant or closed off, because they had developed such strong conscious discrimination that they could instantly recognize when someone was describing their projections rather than your reality. And instead of defending, arguing, or doubting themselves, they simply noted the projection and moved on. If you're recognizing yourself in these signs, you're further along the healing path than you realized. But the next 3 signs reveal something even more profound. They show that you've not only healed from past wounds, you've transformed those wounds into wisdom that makes you psychologically invincible. Jung identified a devastating compulsion in unhealed individuals. They unconsciously recreated the same painful patterns throughout their lives, while genuinely believing themselves to be victims of cruel fate. Different people, different circumstances, but somehow always the same painful outcome, and they never recognized their role in orchestrating the repetition. This compulsion to repeat serves an unconscious purpose. It allows the psyche to continually return to unresolved trauma, hoping this time the outcome will be different. But without conscious integration, the outcome never changes. The person becomes what Jung called the eternal victim, forever trapped in patterns they can't see and therefore can't escape. When you've healed, this compulsion stops. Not because life stops challenging you, because you've integrated the original wound enough to stop unconsciously seeking its recreation. You recognize when you're about to enter a familiar dynamic, and instead of sleepwalking into it, you consciously choose differently. This doesn't mean you never experience similar situations. It means you no longer unconsciously orchestrate them. You've stopped sending out the psychological signals that attracted people who could help you replay your trauma. You've ended the cycle not by becoming perfect, but by becoming conscious. The unhealed psyche craves certainty. It needs absolute answers, clear categories, obvious villains and heroes. This need for certainty reveals what Jung called archetypal possession. When someone becomes possessed by an archetype like the righteous warrior or the divine parent, all ambiguity disappears. Everything becomes black and white. You're either with them or against them. There's no room for complexity or contradiction This state feels powerful because certainty eliminates anxiety. When you know with absolute conviction who the enemy is and what must be done, there's no psychological tension to tolerate. But this certainty comes at a terrible cost. It eliminates your ability to see reality as it actually is, complex and contradictory and constantly shifting. When you've healed, you've developed what Jung called the capacity for holding tension. You can simultaneously hold contradictory truths without needing to resolve them immediately. You can see someone as both wounded and harmful. You can acknowledge your own capacity for both compassion and cruelty. You're no longer terrified of psychological complexity. This tolerance for ambiguity marks profound healing because it requires a strong, integrated ego. Only someone who's done serious shadow work can admit that nothing is as simple as it seems, including themselves. This doesn't make you weak or wishy-washy. It makes you psychologically mature enough to engage with reality instead of simplistic fantasies about it. The unhealed person with a perfect persona lives in constant fear. They've invested all their energy in maintaining a flawless external image while denying every shadow aspect of their personality. They're always appropriate, always kind, always accommodating, until suddenly they're not. Jung documented how these individuals experience violent shadow eruptions when the pressure of maintaining perfection becomes unbearable. Before healing, boundaries are either non-existent or explosive. You either have no boundaries at all, absorbing everyone's dysfunction until you break, or you set boundaries through emotional detonation, creating massive drama and conflict. Neither approach comes from an integrated psyche. When you've healed, boundaries become natural expressions of self-knowledge. You don't need to explode to protect yourself because you've learned to establish limits before resentment builds. You don't need to justify or over-explain your boundaries because you trust your right to have them. You simply state what works for you and what doesn't, and you enforce it without guilt or aggression. This shift reveals integrated shadow work because it requires owning both your light and dark aspects. You've acknowledged your capacity for selfishness, so you're not terrified of being perceived as selfish when you prioritize yourself. You've integrated your anger, so you can set firm boundaries without rage. You've accepted your limitations, so you don't feel compelled to be everything to everyone. Here's what Jung understood that terrifies most psychologists. When someone has genuinely healed and integrated their shadow, they don't become gentler versions of their wounded selves. They become psychologically complete warriors, people capable of incredible compassion toward those who deserve it, and absolute precision toward those who don't. The healed person possesses all the same perceptive abilities, emotional depth, and psychological insight they had when wounded. But now these abilities serve conscious choice instead of unconscious reaction. They can see manipulation coming and neutralize it before it lands. They can feel others' pain without absorbing it. They can perceive darkness in others without needing to fix it, fight it, or become it. This is the transformation Jung believed was possible for everyone, but achieved by very few. Moving from unconscious wounding to conscious wholeness. From being controlled by your unintegrated shadow to wielding your complete psychological range with wisdom and strategic awareness. The goal of healing isn't to eliminate your shadow. It's to integrate it so completely that you can access every part of yourself consciously instead of being controlled by the parts you deny. You don't become less sensitive. You become consciously sensitive. You don't lose your ability to perceive deeply. You gain the wisdom to know when deep perception serves you and when it doesn't. Jung spent his life mapping this territory because he understood something most people miss. Healing isn't about feeling better. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness includes everything you've been taught to reject about yourself. Your anger, your selfishness, your capacity for cruelty. Your shadow contains these qualities, whether you acknowledge them or not. The question is whether you'll integrate them consciously or let them control you unconsciously. These 7 signs reveal that you've chosen conscious integration. You've done the work most people avoid their entire lives. You've looked at your shadow, acknowledged it, and learned to wield it alongside your light. And that makes you one of the rarest psychological types Jung ever studied. Someone who's healed enough to be dangerous to dysfunction, but safe for authentic connection. You've healed more than you realize. Every time you catch yourself before projecting, every time you choose boundaries without drama, every time you tolerate ambiguity instead of demanding certainty, you're demonstrating psychological integration that most people never achieve. If you recognized yourself in these 7 signs, share in the comments which sign resonated most powerfully. Your healing journey matters, and other people walking the same path need to know they're not alone. Subscribe for more insights into Jung's psychology that reveal how transformation actually works, not how we wish it worked. And if you're ready to understand the darker side of this transformation, watch my next video, where I reveal what Jung discovered about empaths who finally learn to use their gifts strategically. Because the awakened empath isn't just healed, they're psychologically unstoppable. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.